Hello Hearties, it's Catherine here, and today I want to talk to you about a recent situation where I was the person at the buying end of a sales transaction, so I was the potential client. And every now and then this happens. I'll be in the position where I'm looking to buy a service myself, and I have some really important reminders and lessons about the sales process that I want to share with you. Now, it doesn't happen every time I'm in the buying position, and that's because when the sales process feels really good, for example, recent examples would be where I signed up with a new accountant, also where I took on a new project manager to help me within the business. The sales process feels very comfortable, it feels very seamless. When it works well, it just feels like a really good collaborative conversation with a positive outcome for both parties where we all walk away feeling really happy. But it's when things don't go so smoothly, where I'm in a sales situation where perhaps I don't decide to go ahead, that I'm able to look back and see where perhaps things didn't go so well, and where there's a lesson to share. And so that's what I'm here to do today. So, as you know, I've just mentioned that I recently signed up a new accountant. So, in recent months, I've been looking for a new accountant. And when it came time to look for an accountant, I decided in advance, I set the intention that I wanted it to be very easy. The last time I'd looked for a new accountant was a few years ago, and I had allowed it to be quite a lengthy and convoluted process where I'd spoken to so many potential accountants that I ended up feeling increasingly confused about my decision. So this time I determined it was going to be easy. I'd even journaled about it and asked the universe to help let this process be easy for me. And so the day rolled around when I had it in my calendar for that afternoon that I was going to start looking into sourcing a new accountant. But first I had a couple of client calls in the morning. And as it happened, it turned out that one of those calls was a one-to-one laser coaching call with a current member of the Business from the Heart community. But I had no idea going into that call that she was actually an accountant herself, looking to change business, but currently working as an accountant. So, of course, it felt like perfect synchronicity to me. And at the end of that session, I asked her about the possibility of working with her. And because she was winding down her practice, she decided to refer me to somebody else. So this was somebody she knew, that she'd known for a long time, who she trusted. And because I had decided that I was going to take the route of least resistance, I decided I was going to trust this referral and I wasn't going to shop around. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because I want you to know that before I got on the call with this potential accountant, and I'm going to call him Colin, not his real name, but for the sake of the example, I'm going to call him Colin. Before I even spoke to him, there was a really, really high chance that I was going to sign up to his accounting services. The referral was trusted and I didn't want to shop around and speak to lots of people. And so we booked in to have a conversation. He was prompt. He booked me in within about a day. So he was eager to have the business. He asked me all the right questions that he needed to ask in order to get a handle on my business. I shared with him all the things that I thought he needed to know in order to understand the amount of work involved and so that he could quote me appropriately. And he also made the effort to outline some of the specific benefits that I would get of working with him in his small practice as opposed to another type of firm, and warned me about some of the things to be on the lookout for if I spoke to other companies. So he also struck me as a very conscientious and reliable and above all organised accountant. And believe me, it is not a given with an accountant that they're going to be organised. You would think so, but it's not. And he gave me a quote on the phone. So far so good, right? Nothing wrong with what he's done so far. In fact, he'd get a few big ticks from me as part of that process. But the end result of this conversation was that he didn't get the sale. Even though I wasn't shopping around, and even when, as it transpires, there was actually no good reason why I should not have gone ahead and signed up with him. So why did it not end up in a sale? Well, it didn't end up in a sale because he forgot, or maybe he didn't know, to ask one very important question at the end of our conversation. He didn't ask me the question, do you have any concerns at this stage? Or he could have asked, Do you have any concerns about anything we've just discussed? Or another way of putting it would be, from what we've discussed today, is there anything that might stop you going ahead and signing up with me? And it's because he missed that one question that David, from a completely different accounting practice, got my business instead. So let me explain why. This was because I did actually have a big concern. So there were 3 parts to the quote that Colin gave me. And one of those pieces felt overpriced to me, and not just a little overpriced, actually. It felt disproportionately overpriced, in particular in comparison to the rest of the quote, and also because I knew, because 2 of my previous accountants had told me that it's just a 15-minute job, so I knew that it didn't justify this, what I felt was an inflated price. Because of this one issue, I balked at going ahead there and then. So he offered to email me a quote, and I offered to get back to him with my decision by the end of the week. And with that, the sale was lost. And because he didn't ask that one question, this is what happened instead. So what happened instead was I started putting feelers out for other accountants I could speak to, partly because I was curious. I didn't know for sure that this piece of his quote was overpriced, but I was curious to know whether it was, and I wanted to get another quote. Also, 3 days later, so not very long after, I was in conversation with another member of my membership community, another former accountant, a very bright woman, who, when I mentioned it to her, pointed out that actually I don't need an accountant to do this piece of work. My bookkeeper could do this for me instead. I checked with my bookkeeper. She was more than happy to incorporate it in the rest of the work she does for me. And suddenly there was no longer a barrier to me signing up to work with Colin. However, the concern hadn't been addressed by Colin, it had been addressed by somebody else. And so by now, because I'd been asking around, I had a call booked in with David. Now there was no barrier to working with Colin. I was all set to go ahead and get back to Colin and say yes. But I thought, you know what, David's booked in, he's been referred to me by someone else I trust. I'm just going to give him the courtesy of having that conversation. Then I'll get back to Colin and I'll say yes. Yeah, how often does this happen? We're surprised at the conversation we have. But I found that conversation with David was very, very different. We were actually on the phone for twice as long as I'd been on the call with Colin. He covered off every single detail and concern that I had, and he took that conversation all the way up to getting a verbal agreement off me to go ahead and sign up with him, subject to my reviewing their terms of engagement. So I put the phone down to that conversation, and although no money had changed hands as yet, I had a new accountant. So can you see where Colin went wrong? All he needed to do was ask me that one simple question. Do you have any concerns about what we've discussed so far? Because that would have been all the invitation that I needed to say, well, yes, actually, I do have a concern. This one part of your service seems disproportionately expensive. But of course, he didn't ask the question. And I'm British. I'm also a people pleaser. I also know the etiquette of a sales conversation, that I was on the receiving end as the potential client. And the very last thing I wanted to do was to risk insulting Colin by appearing to be trying to negotiate or haggle around his fees, because that wasn't really what I was up to. I just wasn't comfortable with this particular quote. But if he'd only asked me, I would have told him. And then he would have known exactly where he stood, and he would have known exactly what was getting in the way of my decision. And he could have addressed it there and then. And perhaps Colin would have been the person to say, oh, actually, you don't need to pay an accountant. You could ask your bookkeeper to do it. Or he could have made the decision to wrap it up in the rest of the fees because it was a small job, which is actually what my 2 previous accountants had done for me. So in other words, he would have had the opportunity to address those concerns. And out of interest as well, while I'm sharing this, when I spoke to David, the accountant who I did sign up with, I actually had many more concerns about David and his service than I had about Colin as the conversation got started. But what was different was that David was willing to address my concerns one by one, in detail and very thoroughly. He didn't get impatient. He didn't make me feel we were running out of time. He didn't make me feel that any of my questions were stupid questions. He just methodically worked through until the point where there was nothing else for me to say apart from, yes, please, how do we get started? How can I send you my documents? And when do you want me to pay? And so, the moral of the story, always ask the question, do you have any concerns? So let me know in the comments how you get on. Let me know, is this something you'd normally ask? Is it something you forget to ask? Is it something you hadn't thought about asking? Start asking this question at the end of your sales conversations before you ask if the potential client is ready to go ahead, and come back and let me know in the comments below how you got on. So I hope you found this breakdown of my recent experience useful today. I do love sharing the real live examples, and I look forward to speaking to you again on one of these videos very soon. Lots of love to all of you. Bye bye.